Hi, everyone. Welcome back. That's a hard act to follow. I'm Katie Couric, and I'm thrilled to be back at the Aspen Ideas Festival. As you all, oh, thank you. Thank you, Walter, and my father-in-law, Herb. It's great to be here. We're shifting gears here on a very serious subject right now because, as you all know, Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershkovich was arrested on March 29th and charged with espionage, an allegation he, the U.S. government, and the Journal vehemently deny. Although Russian prosecutors have presented absolutely no evidence, he's been held for nearly 13 weeks in Moscow's high-security Lefortovo prison and was denied an appeal to end his pretrial detention just last week. Almar Latour, CEO of Dow Jones and publisher of the Wall Street Journal, is here to talk about Evan's situation and the latest efforts to secure his release. So please welcome Almar Latour. So, Almar, I thought it would be appropriate for us to start off talking about Evan. I know he's 31 years old. He's been working at the Journal for less than a year.
Since January of 2022.
So, and what can you tell us about him, his background, his personality, everything?
Yeah, I can provide a little bit of a kaleidoscope. He's been with Wall Street Journal for a year and a half, roughly. Has been, during his very still fresh career, been at many news organizations, at Moscow Times, AFP, started as a news assistant at the New York Times. Some of the things that jump out, he's got a sense of humor. We learned this from many different directions. The London bureau of the Wall Street Journal knows him best. He was operating out of London, and so that's where he's got a large circle of friends veering in and out of Moscow. We hear from his lawyers, his Russian lawyers, that he is resilient, very focused. Evan, and this makes him remarkable, and the kind of reporter that we all want at the Wall Street Journal and elsewhere, is really devoted to his trade. He invested a lot of time in learning Russian and really mastering it, getting to know the country that he covered. He's the son of two Russian Soviet immigrants. Evan is so passionate. He's also a soccer fan. He's a fan of Arsenal. The Arsenal fans have really responded to that very well. I think he can be forgiven for being an Arsenal fan, but he's passionate. For us and for all of us, what's incredibly important is the quality of his reporting. Just over the weekend, as we all witnessed these crazy events in Russia, I went back to some of the coverage, and we have links to all of his stories on the Wall Street Journal site. There's one on Prigozhin and the Kremlin and the tension that's building. And it was written more than 3 months ago, obviously, but it was as if it had been written on Thursday. It was very prescient, and you saw all the trends that clearly Evan reported out very early, and that got reflected.
So he's still helping your reporters report on what's going on now, even though he can't report himself. You mentioned his parents fled the Soviet Union in 1979. I know they live in the States now. How are they coping with this whole situation? It must be just maddening for them.
Yeah, imagine for anyone to see your son incarcerated just like that. So they are, given that, incredibly resilient. Ella, the mother, is a force, very, very strong. Mikhail, the father, similar. But it's hard not to see the emotional toll. And when things like this happen, it can just seem like a news event. Some people now, if you meet him socially, say, "Oh, is he still jailed?" And yes, he is. For the parents, it goes on day and night, and we're just really fortunate to work with them. We have a group of people at the Wall Street Journal and Dow Jones that connect with the parents almost every day, and that's also really important.
Let's talk about your communication with Evan himself. As I mentioned, he was arrested on March 29th. Are you able to obtain any reliable information about how he's doing physically and mentally?
Well, we've only seen him on camera, just the same way that you have seen him during some hearings. So there have been a couple of flashes, and during those, he seems healthy. You see every once in a while a little smirk if he recognizes somebody, and so those are good signs. However, the Russians have broken a protocol that usually is applied in a situation like this when alleged espionage is involved, even though that's totally bogus. That you would still expect an adherence to that. And that entails normally that the consulate or the embassy can go over and check on a prisoner's health. That has happened once. There's been one visit. 3 subsequent requests have been denied. And so that's not in accordance with international treaties, and so that makes it hard to see how he's actually doing. Now, Dow Jones and the Wall Street Journal, we've retained Russian lawyers for him, and they are weirdly under NDA. They cannot talk about the case because it's a secret trial, and if they talk about the case, then they could be charged with espionage. So it's a Kafkaesque situation, but we do learn from them that he's allegedly in good spirits. There's a couple of other ways as well.
Yeah, in fact, you and I were talking earlier before we came to the stage about his close circle of friends in Russia, and how it's fascinating how they're able to communicate with him and how he's actually been able to communicate, I'm sure in a guarded way, with the outside world. Can you tell everyone about that?
Yes, letter writing, not uncommon for prison situations, has been a forceful way for him to connect with the outside world. Now, this is being reviewed by the Russians and such. At the Wall Street Journal, in the newsroom, where there's so much support for him, people write letters, they get batched, they get sent to Russia, and they're delivered to Evan. He responds to a lot of letters and has indicated that he likes receiving these letters. He writes back in Russian, in Cyrillic, handwritten notes. Those get scanned and then get sent back to the US. That's one path. There are friends in London, college friends. He's got, for a 31-year-old, he's got an enormous network of people who love him and support him. And so the letters are one way of expressing that.
And I'm assuming he can't be super honest in those letters. So how do you interpret, I know you got one, and how do you interpret what he's written? And can you read between the lines, if you will?
Well, you just got to accept that the situation is suboptimal, and just still try to pick up the nucleus of it, the heart of it. And in my case, I could definitely see that he was not being fully open, but he did express his gratitude for the communication.
What can you tell us about where he's being held and the conditions that are there? I know this prison is notorious. Can you describe it for us?
Yes. Well, there's a long and sad history of political prisoners in Russia, and Moscow in specific. And this particular prison was built for political prisoners. And in a Wall Street Journal story, we reported that it was effectively designed to make you feel lonely and hopeless. So it's not a pleasant place. It's an evil place where somebody innocent, an innocent American, is being held for doing his job, and it's absolutely awful.
Can you pull back the curtain a little bit and tell us what the Wall Street Journal has been doing to try to secure Evan's release, and kind of the role of the federal government? Because I'm sure you're limited in what you can actually do.
Yes, thank you, Katie. There's a huge reliance on the government, but we've set up a unit to release Evan, a task force, and it has different components, almost like you would run a very effective business, but focused on one goal. One is relations to the government, and the first task there was to make sure that Evan would be designated a wrongfully detained prisoner. That's a special status that unlocks a lot of government resources, and so that happened faster than we had even expected. As a result of that, we've been working with the White House, with the state, with a special department within state, the Special Presidential Envoy for Hostage Affairs, Roger Carstens, who will be here, I believe, tomorrow, is landing today, who spearheads that office. And they're focused really on securing the release of wrongfully detained people, including Evan. In addition to that, there is a DIY element that we didn't know exists, and I don't wish it on anyone, but you can call it private diplomacy, a law firm that works with us to connect with perhaps friendly governments, and other government individuals who could help facilitate a path to release. And so if you look back at some of these cases, including a very recent one, it wasn't espionage, but it was another exacerbated charge with Brittany Griner. There was a trade that happened in the end. And so we're talking to third countries, always in conjunction with the government, always taking the guidance to make sure that we're helping. And the U.S. government is exploring all options on this as well.
Are there efforts being made to find a potential person that could be used as a prisoner exchange, as was the case with Brittany Griner?
Yeah, I don't want to be specific on this given the circumstances, but all options are being explored. We're going all out as a company, I think as a government, and we're incredibly thankful for the work that has happened so quickly. And I also want to say thank you to the many of you in the audience who've expressed support. If for one moment anyone doubts that wearing a button saying "Free Evan" or saying something on social media, if you think that does not help, you're mistaken. That helps a great deal, because there's so many competing priorities in government. We have to make sure that Evan remains a priority.
And keep the pressure on.
That's right.
You know, I know at the time of his arrest, Evan was reporting on PMC Wagner, this private military company, which we've been hearing so much about in recent days. And his last piece was about the deterioration of Russia's economy. And I'm just curious, I know you don't want to legitimize these actions in any way, shape, or form. Do you think that, having said that, do you think it might have precipitated what happened to Evan?
Yeah, I don't want to link it to the arrest of an innocent journalist to a specific story. He was an accredited journalist. He was there with full knowledge of the Russian government. And so to link it back to him doing his job and make it specific somehow can oddly legitimize it, and I don't think that's the right way to go.
Let's talk about the attempted coup, or whatever that was, we all witnessed over the weekend. It's so confusing even now. But given the state of affairs in Russia, not to mention Vladimir Putin's potentially weakened position, and honestly, the chaotic situation that's going on over there right now, how does that hurt or help Evan? I know it obviously complicates the situation, but what do you think is the result of what's happening there on his incarceration, if you will?
Well, so people have been speculating what is going on, period, in Russia. And so all I can say is that there's uncertainty to begin with. And now there is extreme uncertainty layered over that. Now, could some of that result in a breakthrough in the case? We hope so. But more uncertainty stacked upon uncertainty is not something we were hoping for.
Almar, give us a window into what it's been like for your team of reporters, or really any news organization's reporters, reporting from Russia in recent months, really actually since the invasion of Ukraine. People who are simply trying to do their jobs. Many news organizations, of course, have pulled out, but can you talk about the pressure these journalists are under?
Yeah, you can see the results of the pressure that the Kremlin has put on journalism, period. So Friday night, as this all came down, right, there was very, very little information available. Some of the major outlets in the US had very little to show. Only on Saturday did some of that surface, and that's a direct consequence of how little reporting currently can happen in a meaningful way in Russia. For us, we were there in the beginning of the Ukraine war. We're in Ukraine, but in Russia, it's not responsible for us to have a direct presence. Now, we have a lot of experts, a lot of people around Russia who are still doing great reporting, including some of the finest reporting that I would say over the weekend.
But there's no way around it. Not having a presence in Russia has proved very difficult to get to the bottom of what's happening there.
Yes, it's a real problem, and it highlights that this Evan case is also connected to something bigger, right? It's connected to how tolerant are we of autocrats choking off free press. So it's another reason, in my view, to be loud about Evan's incarceration, but also of the hundreds of journalists that have been arrested and are currently being detained all over the world.
And in fact, we have some statistics. The Committee to Protect Journalists has reported a new global high for imprisoned journalists, with 363 reporters reportedly jailed last year, overtaking the previous year's record by 20%. So what do you think is behind this increased hostility towards journalists that's happening worldwide?
Well, it's a deliberate playbook for autocrats that you've seen take place in many countries, Russia probably leading the charge under Putin. You can sort of see it step-by-step consolidation of major media, harassment of journalists, sometimes worse, and pushing out and shutting down certain media outlets. And so that way the autocrat can control the information. It's not, by the way, the only way in which there is a lack of information. If you turn to our situation at home, there are also large gaps in proper information gathering in many towns that we all are from. That is the case. There's no major news outlets that are collecting basic information that can make society function.
The reality is virtually all espionage trials in Russia end in convictions. So do you believe that Evan's freedom will rely on diplomatic efforts rather than any hope of some kind of legal victory?
Well, the legal track record, if you can call it legal, is dismal, and so you have to. It's sobering, and you have to accept that. That said, we have a team of Russian lawyers working on his case that is going step by step. Now, for another wrongfully detained American, Paul Whelan, the process of the arrest, and he was also accused of espionage, the moment from arrest to the conviction was 17 months. And so for Evan already, we're coming on 100 days. There've been 4 hearings, 2 to secure pretrial detention and 2 appeal hearings, and those appeals have been shut down. So the legal path is one that we have to pursue, obviously, because we are in a foreign jurisdiction and we have to play by those rules. But the other part is where a lot of our energy goes, a lot of where the government's energy goes.
Why don't you think Paul Whelan's case is getting more attention, the former U.S. Marine who's been detained, as you said, in Moscow since 2018?
Well, it is actually getting more attention, and wrongfully detained people are getting more attention, in part as a result of the Evan case getting a lot of added attention. So we have a database, effectively a search engine called Factiva, where you can go back and sort of look at sentiment. And what we saw there is, since Evan was arrested, the mention of the word wrongfully detained in 15,000 different sources worldwide has gone up 600%. And so the spotlight on Evan carries a lot farther than his case. And it also is important for free press overall.
You know, a lot of my friends and fellow journalists have complimented the Journal about how you all have covered this story, but I'm just curious, how concerned are you, or how concerned are the journalists writing about Evan? How concerned are they about actually jeopardizing his safety as a result of what they're writing? And how do they balance those two things?
Yeah, the Journal has a relatively new editor, Emma Tucker, who is led with grace. This was a baptism by fire, and the whole newsroom has come together, and so everybody has a shared emotion. So much effort has been poured into this. You raise a really nettlesome point. In the past few weeks, the Russian press made an allusion to that if the Wall Street Journal would continue its coverage in this way or that way, the implication was that it wouldn't be good for Evan. And that's exactly how autocrats want you to think, in Russia, but also in other places, to start somehow self-censoring, to somehow hold back. For us, our mission is to deliver reliable information, help people make decisions around the world, and that means we're going to do our reporting. Our advocacy and our reporting are two separate things. We cannot give up the great reporting.
You recently wrote, "The world is watching." Somebody can give him a round of applause. You recently wrote that the world is watching how the U.S. and Western democracies respond to this kind of affront to free press. What are you hoping in this whole process to teach other organizations, news organizations and otherwise, who may find themselves in a similar situation? Because as you've said, you're kind of writing the playbook as you go along.
Yeah. Well, we were very blessed to have the help of and the experience, the shared experience from institutions like the Washington Post and the WNBA recently as to how to deal with hostage affairs and how you get through it as an organization. And so we hope to continue to give it our all.
Well, Almar Latour of the Wall Street Journal, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.